Hey, welcome to Wildfire. Um, Real quickly, in the past, I've had to edit things out that I wish I could have left in there due to time constraints with the TV show. But if you want to see the unedited version, which is actually somewhat longer, uh, you can go to my website, and all the videos will be downloaded on my website and also on my YouTube channel, which um, I will post down in the credits. So if you want to see the whole conversation, go to my website and it'll be there without commercials. And with that, let's get started. Imagine if every church member carried the torch of evangelism and discipleship. The gospel and the church would spread like a wildfire. Is your torch lit? Christianity is not a spectator sport. There are no bleachers. If you feel unfulfilled, it's because you're not doing your part. This is Wildfire Kingdom, where everyone is a soldier in the army of God. Get your torch out. Let's get it lit. Let's go to war for God. This is spiritual warfare. This is Wildfire Kingdom. Welcome to Wildfire Kingdom. I'm here again with Anthony Swada.
How's it going, guys? Nathan, thanks for having me on again, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me. So Anthony Swada has written a book about church revitalization, and we're going to talk about that today. Oh, there it is. The church is not dead, and we are not done.
Yeah, you can grab it on Amazon if you want to check it out. It's available there right now.
All right. And hopefully I can have it on my bookstore at some point soon. We're working on that. So I had a lady watch the show. Her name is Hollis Freeman, no relation to me that I know of. And she was asking, because we talk a lot about revitalization because her church is in that process. So we do a lot of talking about, but we don't get anything done. How do we get started? What does it look
I see.
so?
Yeah, that's a big thing going on right now, Nathan. Like as we talk about church revitalization and stuff like that, there's a lot of discussion going on right now in church atmospheres about like church revitalization. It seems to be like a hot button topic and things. And that answer is really going to depend on who you ask. Because church revitalization is such a hot topic right now, there are many definitions of what that looks like. And some people are kind of merging definitions when it comes to church revitalization. Some people are saying, church revitalization is a lot like church planting. And so what they mean by that is that they will go find a church somewhere that's dying, and then they will replant in that church. And so they'll take a core group of people in there, and then they'll just kind of plant a church in the middle of it. They'll change the logo, they'll change the ideology, they'll change the culture, they'll change the bylaws, they'll change the pastor, they change everything out. And so what they are is kind of like they're going in there as a church plant, and then they're just feeding off the resources of the dying church as it kind of dwindles out. And some of the members will join that church plant and things like that, but a lot of times they're just seen as, just part of what they're being replaced with.
Yeah.
Another thing that I'm seeing right now too is like church revitalization is also being really confused with church growth. And what I mean by that is this, is that church revitalization is different from church growth. Church revitalization is really the process of taking a church that's in decline or dying, and it's changing the culture in that church in order to see it come about to be new life, to be revived. It's revitalization. Church growth is very different from that. Church growth is one of those things where, a church may be progressing and it's healthy and it's growing, and you're just adding to it. You're just fixing the ministries in order to reach more people and stuff like that. And so the reason why this is so important here is because whenever you have a question like that, you really have to identify what they mean by church revitalization and how that works. Because if they're in a process again of church replanting, then the goals of that are going to be different. The process of that is going to be different. Or if they're in the process of church growth, then again, your goals are going to be different. Your process is going to be different, all those type of things. And so whenever we're talking about this, we really have to understand that church revitalization, again, is going into a church that's on decline or dying, and then helping that culture shift in order to see it be revitalized, being brought back to life and stuff. And so that question, let's talk about that question for a minute, even further. So read the question to me again one more time.
Let's see. So that there's a lot of talk about church revitalization, but not a lot of action. How do we get started? So I guess you want to know what's the catalyst? How do we get past the inertia? What's the first step?
Yeah. So when we start talking about the process, right? Like the process or the formula of revitalization, let's start with understanding something just right on the front end of this. Right on the front end of this, I have to tell you that this is a difficult process and it's not an overnight process. I'm trying to tell you right now that there is no magic bullets to this process. It's not A plus B equals C or something crazy like that. It's really a shift in culture and understanding. And so you have to come to this realization that, first of all, you're entering into something here that is massive and it's going to take some stuff from you. And first thing that it's going to take from you is a whole lot of prayer. A lot of prayer from you as an individual, and a whole lot of prayer from your church, and a lot of prayer from your pastor. This is something that you really have to pray through and ask for the Lord's guidance through, and ask for His power, because aside from the Lord, you're not going to revitalize. Just
Right,
hate to break it to you that way. We can read
right,
all the books, we can have all the plans, we can have all the right answers to be able to do this, but unless the Lord brings the growth in this, man, it just doesn't work. It doesn't
right. And,
work, and so
and
you
it's gonna be a serious
really have to
prayer. I
understand.
mean, it's got to be a serious prayer because you can't be just like bless the food, bless the church, and move on. It's got to be on your knees, weeping, repenting of your inaction. It's got to be everyone putting their pride aside, trading their pride for prayer, and that's the hard part. For because the reason they got to the point of needing revitalization is because pride crept in and everyone started thinking about themselves and what made them comfortable instead of how to go out and reach the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, like, as you think through this, you got to understand it's going to be hard. You got to pray a whole lot in this. Then you got to evaluate kind of like where your church is at. What are the things that are threats or weaknesses of your church? Why is your church not being effective? You mentioned one just a minute ago there where it was like an inward focus. That may lead to other things such as like financial issues or staffing issues or church culture issues, things like that. So you got to identify those things and realize that you're in a place where something has got to change. And if you don't get to that place where something has got to change, you're just going to continue on doing what you've always done and expected different results. And that's one of the other major blunders of revitalization. There are two that are major. First one is don't pray. Second one there is not realizing that if you don't do something, you're going to die.
Right.
Because all church revitalization, I like to think of it this way, or I don't like to think of it this way, but I find this is helpful to think of it this way. A church that is dying is the church that dies by 1,000 cuts. There's one issue that leads to another issue, that leads to another issue, another issue, and another issue. And it's like it's constantly being cutted. And eventually, when a person is cut like that, they bleed out, they lose all their blood, and it's gradual. And so the process, it may take months, it may take years, it may take decades, but they're slowly declining to the point where people are looking around going, okay, well, I'm okay, I can endure another cut, I can endure another issue. And they never come to the realization of, hey, we got to change something. So that's the next thing, pray. And then the next thing is realize where you're at, you got to change something. And then after that, Then you're going to start looking at culture and how things change in revitalization. And so that's what we're really talking about. How do we change in revitalization? Or what is the process or formula of that? Now, I could come in here and give you this ABC equals D model, some kind of formula and stuff like that. But if I did that, I would be doing you a disservice because, again, I'm going to tell you there are no magic bullets. This is a process of changing a culture in your church to become a healthy church from an unhealthy church. And so, in reality, there are a lot of things that need to be addressed all at once. And when you start addressing these in small ways, what it does is it builds momentum in the church, almost like a snowball being rolled down a hill. And it gains momentum as it builds bigger, and it gets faster and faster and faster as it builds bigger. And the culture is slowly changed from inward to outward. Does that
Right.
make sense, Nathan?
Yeah. So basically, it's not so much a step-by-step process as it is ingredients that we're all putting them all together at once, and we got to bake it.
That's
So
right.
we can't just do you can't just put the flour in a bowl and then just wait for it and then put sugar in another bowl, wait for that. You got to put all the ingredients together and do all of it.
That's right. You're shifting a culture, and you're even doing it based on the context and the size of your church. Like that's another thing too, right? So like if I'm a small town baker, I'm not going to bake the world's largest cookie.
Right.
Like that's not what I'm going to do. If I'm a small town baker and I have small ingredients, then I'm going to bake, a dozen cookies, right? Like a baker's dozen. But if I'm a big baker, like I have a big church with a lot of resources and stuff like that, I may bake several hundred dozen cookies, or I may bake the world's largest cookie, or whatever. So you also got to think through that these ingredients, it's not a prescribed amount. It's you do what the context of your church is able to do in that moment, but you just add all those ingredients in to be able to begin shifting that culture, and then you expand as you go along.
All right.
So yeah, man.
So what are the ingredients then?
So there are going to be a lot of ingredients whenever you talk about this, but a lot of this is going to kind of fall out of the Great Commission and also the model of Jesus. So, one of the first things that we talked about, even on this whole process, is how vital prayer is. And nothing can be done without the Lord's power and will in the church. So, I'm going to tell you the primary ingredient within church revitalization that needs to be shifted is prayer in a church. It's disheartening for me to be a pastor and to just confess to you that, our Sunday morning gatherings with all the music and the service, we have a lot of people in those gatherings. But when it comes down to the prayer service, it is just a very small percentage of the church body.
It's not
Now,
fun.
that shouldn't be the case.
Right.
Whenever we look at the life of Jesus, Jesus valued prayer over just about anything else. I mean, oftentimes Jesus was sneaking off on his own to go spend time with the Father. Even when he was busy, even when people were running at him and going like, heal me, we need you, we need your ministry, that type of stuff, he would always make time for prayer. And we also see this in the life of a church when he walks into the temple and they're exchanging money and doing those type of things. He turns over the temple tables, which we love that story and everything else. But the point of it is that you turned my father's house into a house of thieves when it should be a house of prayer. And so I'm going to tell you the very first and most important ingredient in all of this is going to be prayer. We need to understand that prayer is a primary ingredient in this, and that we have to have a church that's willing to go to prayer over their church. So this may look like several different things in different contexts, but in the context of my church, and one of the things that I've done in the past is I've done focused prayer meetings where we come to a prayer meeting with the sole intention of praying for our church, the impact on the community, our evangelistic witness, and those type of things. Now, I know we've all been to prayer meetings where it's a resuscitation, it's the organ recital, as they say, where everybody's saying like, hey, let me tell you about all my organs that have ailments, or my sister's brother, cousin, toe. I'm not telling you don't pray for those things,
Got to pray about
but
the
in
toe.
church revitalization, you got to pray for your church and your community. Have focused prayer meetings for church revitalization. Were you going to say something?
Yeah. So I used to be a member of Second Baptist Church in Springfield, Missouri, and our pastor was Dr. John Marshall. You might have heard of him. Um, and he used to say that, I told him that I had my master's in evangelism and church planting, and he said that anytime you want to plant a church, you want to bathe it in prayer or baptize it in prayer, because we're Baptists, like to baptize things. Um, and,
Yes,
and also what you said before is that he said that the light that shines the farthest shines the brightest at home. So we need to focus on our local community to make sure that our local community sees us as a light. And then as we become light to our community, then we're practicing to go out to the rest of the world.
that's right. And so that's something that we need to understand as far as one of the ingredients is prayer and making that a primary thing in our church. Another thing is going to be missions. Um, Missions are going to be a primary thing as one of the ingredients. And I don't just mean missions in the sense of like going to Africa or going to China or some kind of long-term mission trip or something like that. But the mission of God is the primary calling of the church to go and make disciples. Jesus modeled this. He taught his disciples how to do it. I don't have to build very much of a biblical case to tell you that the church is called to missions, but it needs to be built back in the DNA of a church whenever you begin church revitalization. So that's going to take several forms, honestly. That's going to take the forms of local missions in our community, sharing the gospel, evangelization, all those type of things. But it's also going to take some missions outside of our community. And I know there's always pushback on this, but I'm going to tell you this is one of the ingredients that needs to happen. So, like one of the ways that I've received pushback in the past is when I was in a very small church revitalization, we started taking mission trips to Tennessee at that point in time, and I was taking students on mission to Tennessee to go and serve a local church plant there and serve a community there in order that that church may reach the gospel. When we got back, I literally had one of the church leadership come to me and say, "Why are we doing missions in Tennessee? We got plenty of need right here in our hometown, and our church is not doing that well. We need ministry here in our hometown." And my answer to him was, yes, we do need ministry in our hometown, but we need ministry in both are what we're called to. When Jesus gave the commission in Matthew, or I'm sorry, not Matthew, Acts 8:1-8, he told them to go to Jerusalem, oh my goodness, I'm stumbling on my words right now. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So he tells them not to just focus on their home place, but also focus on the uttermost. And so even if you're in a church revitalization process, don't just minister and do missions in your hometown. Don't just share the gospel there, but share the gospel everywhere that you possibly can. And what happens whenever a pastor will do this and lead their church and missions locally and abroad, what he'll find is that when he takes people abroad, what he's doing is he's equipping them to then bring that equipping home and serve locally. And so in my case, when I took all those students to Tennessee, man, they learned how to share the gospel. They saw God move. They were equipped for the service. And when they came back, I can guarantee you who was with me whenever I went and knocked on doors and shared the gospel when I was back home. And so
Yeah.
missions had to be incorporated into that fellowship, into the DNA of the church. And then whenever the church body heard all these guys who had gone on a mission trip and what God had done, they then stopped looking inward just in their immediate context and then began to look outwards. It gave them an outward focus in this. So missions and evangelism is another one of those ingredients that we need to add in there. We need to start changing the focus of the church to be outward instead of inward. So another one, let's talk about another ingredient that we need to just kind of discuss here is discipleship. A lot of churches, they say discipleship, discipleship, discipleship. We're a church that makes disciples, and we throw this around like some kind of buzzword. But a church needs to have an intentional plan of discipleship. And that's one of the ingredients of church revitalization. Uh, in most dying or declining churches, there is no clear process of discipleship. There's no Uh, what does a disciple look like? What is expected of a disciple? What are we trying to teach our disciples? In a dying or declining church, a lot of times it's just kind of, we're just kind of doing the same old thing we've always done. And we're doing it with the same old people that we've always done it with.
Mhm.
And that's not discipleship. Robbie Gallaty says it this way. He says discipleship is not teaching old Christians new material. It's teaching new Christians old material. And that's very helpful because a lot of times declining churches or dying churches, they'll say, we're doing discipleship. We have Sunday school. We're studying the Bible together. But the problem is that there's never any new life in there. There's
Right.
never any new believers that come in. It's always just the same old people doing the same old things. And then they pick new Bible studies and they call it, oh, we're discipling one another or something like that. Well, at some point in time, we're not called to just hold that in ourselves. We're called to overflow into the community, into new believers. We're called to share the gospel and then raise them up and teach them what Jesus told them to do, to make other disciples and stuff like that. And so that's the other component of this. There has to be some kind of clear process of discipleship in your church on how do I take a new believer and make them a mature believer who is then going to take another new believer and make them a mature believer. And then it processes on and on and on and on. And so
Right.
we have to make disciple making disciples.
Yeah. I want to add to that. I know I've seen where a lot of people say, "Well, I'm not being fed." The problem is not that you're not being fed. The problem is that all you're doing is being fed. You're not feeding others, and that's where the problem starts because there are two seas in Israel. There's the Sea of Galilee, it's teeming with fish, feeds the whole nation with fish. And the River Jordan runs through the Sea of Galilee and then runs to the Dead Sea. The reason the Dead Sea is dead is because it receives but it doesn't give out. It just receives water, and it's brackish, it's full of salt, and it produces no life. There's no fish in there. You can float on there just by looking at it. Um, and there's a lot of Dead Sea people in church because all they do is receive, 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 and they don't give. The Dead Sea could be teeming with fish if all they do is create an aqueduct or something that led out to the sea. Then you have water coming in and water coming out,
Yeah,
and then the fish would come. But
sure.
because all it does is receive, 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 and it doesn't give out, it's dead. And that's why we have
And
dying churches.
whenever you have somebody that vocalizes that, they're vocalizing the culture of the church or their ideology of a church. And that's another thing too, that again, we're trying to change this culture. It's not all about me. So like what they're vocalizing whenever they say something like, I'm not being fed, what they're vocalizing there is that my understanding of church culture and church, what the church is that it should be a place where I come to get fed.
Right.
Um, I come to get filled up. And in some places that's kind of okay, but that's not really what it's about. The church is not just there to make you smarter or make you more educated or feed you in a sense. What the church is there to do is to equip you in order that you may pour into somebody else.
Right.
It's a place where all the saints gather to get equipping, to get I guess, armed up, if you will, to go out there and fight the good fight, man, and to go
Right.
out and share the gospel. So yeah, it's not to remain in us; it's supposed to be poured out to everybody else. Absolutely.
Right. When I was in basic training, they fed us and they also trained us. But at some point, after 9 to 10 weeks, they said, "All right, guys, you're trying to get out there and fight." Um, it wasn't just like, "Well, let's just turn it into a resort." I was like, "Well, maybe it is now because the army is getting weak." But back when I was in the army, they trained you to be hard. They trained you to be prepared to go out and fight the good fight. And a lot of people they just want to stay in sick call, and just get fed at the defect every day.
That's right. That's right. So if we're to kind of summarize this a little bit, in the process or the formula of revitalization, first thing that we need to do is we need to pray. First thing, start praying. My goodness, start praying. Second thing we need to do is we need to understand kind of where we're at as a church, what the culture is, what are the threats, what are the weaknesses, those type of things. Third thing, once that happens and we understand that something has to change, we then start adding these ingredients. And the ingredients are, at this point, prayer, missions and evangelism, and discipleship. And I know we're talking about some groundbreaking things here, right? Like this is all stuff we already know.
Yeah, get back to basics. Like when Vince Lombardi won the first Super Bowl, they all thought that they are hot stuff, and they came back the next year and thought they were going to run a bunch of trick plays, and they got crushed the first game. And Vince Lombardi, took this Super Bowl winning team back to the field on Monday morning, held up the football, and said, "This is a football." And they got back to the fundamentals of what it took to win a football game, and that's how they won another Super Bowl, because they got back to the fundamentals.
Absolutely. It's not quantum physics, right? Like Jesus told us what to do. So we just go out there and do it. And we add the ingredients in there too. I also want to address something else too, because one of the things that I also see in church revitalization is kind of exposed to this text message you got. You had a church member message you, how do we get involved in church revitalization? And that's an interesting thing because it runs to this question like, who leads in church revitalization and how does that work? Like in church revitalization, what is the process of this? Does it have to be the pastor that kind of goes, okay, church, we're revitalizing now? Or is it the deacons that stand up and say, we need to be revitalized? Or is it the church members who come together and kind of draw this initiative and things like that? And whenever we approach this discussion, like it has to be all of
Right.
them. And I have to tell you that because this is a big, big thing. If unless a church is unified in the process of church revitalization, it's just not going to work.
Right.
And what I mean by that is this: is like, okay, I'm a new pastor and I walk into a small church, my first pastorate. Church needs to be revitalized. It's obvious. It's on the wall, right? Like everybody sees it. We're declining in numbers. Our offerings, man, we're barely making budget. If we are making budget, it's just a little bit, but we're not really seeing new baptisms. We're not going on mission trips. We're not making disciples. We're not seeing any spiritual growth in that sense within new believers. And I walk into that church, again, first pastor, and go, church, we need to be revitalized. And then my deacons go, looks pretty good around here. And then my church members go, what are you talking about? Like, we have all the stuff, man. I got a Sunday school that I love. I have my choir practice that is awesome. I love the worship on Sundays. I come here and man, preacher, you're so good. You're feeding us with your sermons. Like everything's good. Like this is awesome. And by the way, have you looked at our community? Like our community, I don't know. It's just I don't know if they really need to be reached. If that's the case, what's going to happen is that the pastor may feel this inclination to just start running in a direction and start making broad changes in that church. But the reality is, unless those people are following him, he's not leading well. He's just running, and nobody's with him. And so that needs to be understood that, like, if it's just the pastor driving this, and there is no leadership, there is no congregation following him, he's going to have some major issues when it comes to revitalization.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone has to be involved. Like everyone wants the cake, but no one wants to bake. But with that, we are out of time. But we'll be back next week, and hopefully you'll be with us.
Hey, hold on just one sec. Can I finish that discussion? I'll do
Sure.
it quick.
All right.
Because I want to, before we jump off of this, I want to address what happens if the congregation wants to lead revitalization and the pastor doesn't.
Okay.
Uh,
You have 55 seconds.
Come on, Nathan. We'll cut some of that other stuff out. Uh,
Okay.
the other issue that I see in church revitalization is when a congregation sees a need for revitalization and the pastor doesn't. Sometimes pastors get into a church where they're comfortable and they just want to kind of let the time run out, if you will. Um, Church revitalization ain't going to work that way either. Unless your pastor is on board with revitalization, is willing to make those changes, then a church won't be revitalized as well. The congregation will always be pushing, and he'll always be pushing back. And so it's not a healthy situation whenever that happens. So just be aware of that too. Maybe that's a time for a pastor to step down. My earpiece fell out. Maybe that's a time for a pastor to step down, or maybe look at another pastor who would be able to lead well in revitalization.
Okay. That's all the time we have, and then some. So we'll cut the edit test, and I'll see you next week.
All right, Nathan, you have a great day. Okay, buddy.
All right. I want to emphasize power of prayer and the kind of prayer it takes to bring down strongholds. So we said before, we don't want just any kind of prayer, not just seeing how many times we can say thee and thou, or bless the food, bless the church, bless my ingrown toenail. Talking about spiritual warfare kind of prayer. In 1999, I was at Second Baptist Church in Springfield, Missouri, and church invited the power team to come and do a performance. If you don't know who the power team is, they're a bunch of like super ridiculously strong people who do feats of strength. Um, and they get really gets your attention. It's really cool. And then they share the gospel. Um, in preparation for this, church got on their knees. It has brand new sanctuary back then, but I think the sanctuary was built in 2000. Um, Everyone came by the hundreds. The church started out, well, in 1999, the church had about 600 uh, members. And about 3 to 4, in about a couple of years, they went from 600 to 2,000. How does that happen? Mind you, the church was growing even without a full-time pastor. They had an interim pastor. Dr. Voifish came in and was the interim pastor while they looked for a new pastor, which turned out to be Dr. John Marshall. They grew without a pastor because the leadership wasn't just with the pastor, it was everyone was involved. Everybody came to church on Wednesday night. They prayed over every pew, every seat, every inch of that building in preparation for the power team to come. Not just one Wednesday, but 4 Wednesdays in a row, or Sunday nights in a row. Every time they came to church, there are people praying over every pew, every seat in that building. Serious prayers. They prayed over every elementary school in the city. They prayed over every place that the power team would possibly be. They prayed for souls to be won. Prayed for every conceivable thing they could possibly pray for in preparation for the power team to come. After the power team came, it took 3 weeks to baptize everyone by the dozens, hundreds, actually. And that's the kind of that's what you want. But it's going to take getting on your knees, putting missions, evangelism, all this stuff first. Stop arguing about the color of the carpet, kind of music you want. If you're worshiping God, it doesn't matter what kind of music you have, as long as you sing it passionately because you're worshiping and not just singing it because you like the song. Worship isn't about you or the kind of music you like. It's about giving your best to God. Um, Recently, I had a friend named Assad who was taking an exam for IT cert. That doesn't seem like a very big thing, but the problem was that his attitude, there's a spirit of oppression on him. He felt like he couldn't win no matter what. So he need more than the IT cert. He needed a win in his life. He needed that power of that demonic oppression off of him so he could study, so he could take the exam with confidence. So I asked him when he was taking the exam. He told me, so when the exam started, I prayed hard, prayed so hard I ended up in the hospital later. But I prayed hard for half an hour in Jesus' name, rebuking the satanic, demonic power that was over him, that's keeping him from being able to be successful. 7:30, I broke through. I knew at 7:30 he's going to win that. I knew at 7:30 he's going to pass that exam. 15 minutes later, 7:45, he posted that he'd passed the exam. I knew that 15 minutes ago. I just felt it. It was costly prayer. I ended up in the hospital with a migraine, and I was couldn't breathe. Um, okay now. Well, as okay as I ever am. When's the last time you prayed like that? When's the last time you really got on your knees, just did battle? If you're in revitalization stage, everyone in your church needs to be on the battlefield. This is not a spectator sport. Everybody, as my first sergeant used to say, lottie daddy, everybody get involved. Everyone needs to be picking up trash. Everyone needs to be doing their job. Evangelism is not for a select few. It's everyone's job. Prayer is everyone's job. Discipleship is everyone's job. If, if the Holy Spirit puts you, if the Holy Spirit involved you in leading someone to Christ, then He chose you to disciple that person as well. I know that's kind of scary because thinking you might fail. Probably will, but you have to keep trying. And if you never done it before, of course you're going to fail. The more you do it, though, the more you become more focused on your behaviors, more your personal holiness. The more you take it seriously, the more you become invested in your walk as you become invested in someone else's walk. You know, you have to lead by example. So it's something you want to take away. If you don't feel like you're being fed, it's because you're not feeding anyone. If you don't feel like you're being fed, maybe you're choosing not to eat, or you don't like what's on the menu. I've had people I've shared the scripture with people and they say, I don't believe that. The Bible is not a smorgasbord. It's not a banquet. It's not a buffet where you get to pick and choose what you believe or not. It's all true. You have to believe it all, whether you like it or not. And if you believe it, then you need to obey it. If you're not obeying it, then you don't really believe it, then do you? Do you? So Jesus said, if you love me, you obey my commandments. All of them. So I would encourage you, your homework tonight, your homework this week is to read all the red letters, everything that Jesus said. I want you to read it all. Read it all every day, every week. Just keep reading it until it becomes yours. Thank you.